Welcome, everyone, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. Thanks for joining us today. If you listen to the show, you know that I'm going to ask you to please review us on Apple Podcasts. It makes it easier for people to find us. So if you have a few minutes and you want to go in there and give us hopefully a 5-star review, that'd be great. It's June. I'm sort of shocked, I'll be honest with you, how we got here so fast, but we did. So it's already June. And so for those students who are rising seniors, if you haven't started doing much as far as your college process is concerned, now's the time. But anyway, we'll be talking about that all summer. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about insurance for students going away to college, different types, things to think about. But before that, we're actually going to spend 2 segments talking about going to college with ADD, ADHD. And I'm really excited to join Hannah Choi, who is an executive function coach at Beyond BookSmart and also the host of Focus Forward, an executive function podcast. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Beth. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you joining today because this is an area in which certainly we work with students who face these challenges, but we're not experts in this area. So, and that's what you are. So maybe I was hoping we could start by you telling us a little bit more about your background and about Beyond BookSmart.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Well, I'll start with Beyond BookSmart. Beyond BookSmart is an executive function coaching company, and I saw that you've actually you didn't, but one of your hosts interviewed Michael Delman, who is our CEO, back in the beginning of the pandemic. So he was on already, and we provide executive function support for people of all ages, not that many elementary, mostly middle school, high school, college, and beyond. So I personally mostly work with college age students, but I have worked with clients of all ages. And I have 2 kids who are rising sixth graders and ninth graders. And before I had my kids, I worked at a community college in Santa Barbara, California, in the Office for Students with Disabilities. And in that role, I supported students very similarly to how I do now. And
Awesome.
most of our students there had ADHD, as do many of our clients today.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So, and I mean, I think that in general, we may have a lot of listeners with students who have actual diagnoses, or perhaps they've just noticed that
Yep.
executive functioning, not a strength for their student. And I think probably not a bad idea to say that this could be helpful for many
Yes.
people, whether you have this diagnosis or not.
Yes, and that's something that I really try to help people understand as the host of Focus Forward is that you do not need to have a diagnosis to have challenges with executive function skills. You know, all of us have some area of executive functioning that we find more challenging than others, and that's okay. And there are so many different strategies and tools and approaches that can level the playing field in those areas. So,
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
yeah.
Before we go there, I did want to start with kind of college, right? And the kinds of supports that are available to students, maybe who have the diagnoses in
Mhm.
college, because I know that this varies. And we have certainly talked on the show before about some of the types of programs that are out there, but I would love to get your take on, what different options are you going to tend to find out there at colleges?
Yeah. So the point that you made about having a diagnosis is an important one because in order to take advantage of the services provided by the Disability Services Office, which every college will have because of the ADA, the ADA requires support for people with any kind of diagnosis like that. So it is important to have a diagnosis. Going in if you're looking for support specifically from the Disability Services Office. And so the range of support, can vary from extended time on tests, maybe taking the tests outside of the regular classroom setting, note taking, extensions on projects. And something that I always really encourage my clients to take advantage of is getting connected with the office. And even if they don't use any of those services, it's really great to have a connection with the office because they can help you if you need to advocate for yourself. Most professors are very accommodating. Some professors find it harder to be accommodating for learning differences. And so having the disability services office kind of on your side can be, even if that's all you use it for, just like having someone, maybe finding some confidence how to communicate to your professor the you know the needs that you have. It can be really great to have them on your side.
Got it. And in terms of, is it your experience that there are some schools that, so there are ADA requirements, right? That's kind of the
Mhm.
basics. Are there
Yep.
schools that go kind of above and beyond that to do much more for their students? And, what do those programs typically look like?
Yeah. Well, the services that are provided, I believe they will not vary too much. I mean, you're going to find that extended time on tests and different test taking environments and note taking and all the variety of supports that are out there. But what you might find varies from school to school is the environment of the office
Mhm.
and just kind of the vibe that you get from it. And so, just finding someone within the office that you work really well with is really important. And so I think you can expect to find the support that you need from a school. How they provide it is going to vary. And so I do think it's really important when you're touring schools to stop by the office for students with disabilities and find out, what does it feel like in there. How do they approach supporting students. And that's another thing to keep in mind, is that something for people with ADHD, it's really, really, really helpful to have people in your life that get you, right? That
Mhm.
understand why certain things are challenging and why you might need to do something differently. And so if you walk into that office and you feel like, oh, they get me,
Mhm.
then that's a school you should apply to.
Right. And I mean, it could even be as simple as how many people are in the office? Are there
Yeah.
students in there, right, accessing help?
Yes.
Are there a lot of staff members, or is it very sparsely staffed? Now,
Yes.
important to note, if you're there at lunchtime, that may not tell you, right, what you need to know. So asking questions, how many people are typically, how many students come in here on a regular basis? How many people work here? Because certainly one of the things we've seen is that some schools take those ADA requirements, they're going to do the minimum and not more.
Yes.
And other schools are really going to go all out.
Yeah.
Where I worked at Penn, there was a whole specially funded program for students with challenges that extended beyond just needing a diagnosis, that an alum had funded. And so you might find, a program like that. But I love the idea, which I've actually never talked to students about before. So adding this one to my repertoire of just saying, like, how does it feel when you're in there? Do you feel
Yeah.
like they kind of get
Yes.
you? Which I think is a
Yeah.
really good one.
Yeah, and all those questions that you mentioned is such a big part of that self-advocacy piece. And the best way to practice that is to walk in or call and say, "Hey, these are the services that I've used before. How can I take advantage of them now?" Or I qualify for these services. I did not need them in high school. I anticipate that I might need them in college. How can I take advantage of that? And that office is a really safe place to practice that self-advocacy.
Right, right. And I know that we have parents who are listening who are maybe saying, well, I can do that for them. But I love that message too, is maybe before you do the visit, if you can sit and practice with your child to
Yes.
get them, they have their list of questions that they can ask
Mhm.
and feel confident asking them. And then, you can always be there to ask a follow-up, but maybe having them initiate the conversation could be great. And I think also, asking for questions around when are you open? Right? Is this a 9 to 5 thing? So it'll be difficult to access if you have a really full day during the day. Are they going to be there at night when you're working on homework? When are the hours you're going to be able to engage with that office? I think would probably be another good question to ask.
Absolutely. I loved it when I worked in that office when kids would come in and the parents would stand back and the kid would turn around and look at the parent for the support, and the parent would say, "Go ahead. You asked the question. You're here now. It's your turn." And
Right?
I love that. They're there just in case to answer the questions that the kids don't know the answers to, but they're really encouraging their child and really setting their kids up for success by allowing them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think anytime the student is the one putting the first foot forward is always, always a great thing. And we certainly encourage that. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm curious if there are any tips that you would have for, students just kind of trying to think about, what do I actually need when I get to college? Because like you say, maybe a student has a diagnosis, but hasn't accessed any of those services yet.
Mhm.
Maybe they never got a diagnosis, or they just got a diagnosis, or they know that there are a few things. How do you go about figuring out what it is you need so that when you're on the campus looking at it, you are better prepared to look for those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think the first part of the answer to that is to make sure that you're making that visit to the office early on in the beginning of the semester. And yes, you're right. You're not going to know what you're going to need. Or maybe you do. Maybe you know yourself really well. You know you've used accommodations all through high school. And so you know yourself really well. But if you're a person who isn't really sure, or like you said, you've just been diagnosed, or maybe you're curious if you have ADHD and you want to get diagnosed, I really recommend going in early before the stress of the semester sets in.
Yeah.
And yes, you're not going to know what you need, but they can work through that with you, ask you questions. What kind of learner are you? How do you approach your learning? How do you approach your, test taking? What's challenging? What are you good at? And then they can help you and narrow down what accommodations might be helpful. And then they'll walk you through how to take advantage of them. But I cannot stress enough to go in the beginning of the semester, because if you go in at midterms or even at finals, it's going to be mobbed in there and
Yeah.
you're already going to be really highly stressed out. It's going to be difficult to access your executive function skills anyway because you're going to be stressed out. So if you already know the people in there, they already know you, you know what you can take advantage of. It just makes everything a lot easier.
Yeah. I mean, I think like maybe that's the thing you do week one when orientation and things are going on, right? Because
Yes. Yes.
exactly to your point, if you wait until you have a problem, it's so much harder for them to help you
Yep.
as you're going
And
through it. Yeah.
and that actually goes right hand in hand with something that I always challenge my college students to do, is to introduce themselves to their professors in the first 2 weeks of class.
Mhm.
And if you pair introducing yourself at the disabilities office and connecting with them at the same time, then if you need any support from the disability office to work through a script that you might use when you are introducing yourself to the professor, you can feel really supported because you're going into that meeting with the professor with a little bit more knowledge, something to
Yes.
say.
So exactly. They've experienced it. Oh, you're going to meet with a professor. Let me tell you, here are some things that tend to work, and here are things maybe
Yes.
you want to stay away from, kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they also probably know the professors. So they know, oh, they're so supportive, don't worry about it. Or, oh, I've heard in the past that they're not as supportive, but, so here's something that you might say.
Right, right. I love that advice. And actually, I'm going to give that advice around going in there early and
Yes.
making that connection to the college search process. We talk a lot about visiting colleges, and I know that it's not always possible. But if you're a student with ADD, ADHD, this is going to be a challenge when you get to college. I think visiting becomes even more important, and making those visits early. So we
Yeah.
definitely talk to people who are sort of like, well, I'm going to apply and then I'm going to see where I get in, and then I'm going to go do my visits. And that is not a good strategy when you know that you have special,
Yes.
support needs when you arrive in college. You need to be doing that early, because what if
Yep.
all the schools you visit don't feel right? Well,
Yeah.
now you need to maybe visit some additional schools. And I will say this, that physically visiting is certainly the ideal, but you don't have to. You can do remote visits. You can make appointments with those disability offices to ask questions. And while it won't be entirely like the real thing, you might use that as a way to narrow down the schools that you will visit,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And beforehand.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
we're going to continue to hit on that. Start this process early. It's super important when you're in a situation where you just know you're going to need more than the average student. And I
Yeah.
think That's
Or
important.
even if the student thinks they might not use it, and I always tell them, like, it's okay if you don't use it. You don't need to use the services. I still encourage you to go in and introduce yourself and just find out what's available, and then it's up to you whether you use it or not.
Any particular place that you recommend students go to see kind of like what is, I mean, you talked about already, the general supports are going to be the same from school to school. How they're delivered might feel a little different. Is there any resource that you encourage students to use, or anything, any place to go that you found very useful for students?
Yeah, I really encourage students that are neurodivergent to take advantage of any resource that's on campus, especially their academic advisor. That's hugely important. Build a really strong relationship with your academic advisor early on. And then the tutoring centers, math centers, writing centers, they are there exactly for that. And everyone that works there wants to be there, and they're really interested in, the work that they're doing. So I really encourage you to take advantage of that.
Quick question, and then we're going to go to break. And that is, I find sometimes that a lot of parents of neurodivergent students, perhaps less the students themselves, feel like small is always going to be best, a small school, small campus. What's your experience with that?
Well, I think it really goes back to how you feel on the campus, because some of the larger schools are going to be able to offer more. For example, a large school might have a psychiatrist on campus, which can be really helpful for students who might not want to leave campus to go to manage their meds.
Right.
So it really depends on, I think, how high your needs are, and also just how the school feels for you. And I think that's why it's really important to visit both. I don't think that you should write off a large school if it has like a small community feel and can provide the services that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. Thank you. I hate blanket statements when it comes to college because it's
Yeah.
basically impossible to make them. And so,
Really.
yeah, one thing might be for a student who has a lot of needs is maybe not looking so far from home that it would be difficult,
Yes.
right, for your
Yes.
family to get to you. But otherwise, like,
Yep.
be open to what's
Yep.
available out there. All right,
Yep.
we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to keep talking, talk some more about this stuff. So don't go away.
Great.